Beneath the steel glow of cranes at Port Lázaro Cárdenas, the ocean was quiet, too quiet for what it carried. Underneath the hum of diesel engines, a cargo vessel slid into the bay, its hull packed with containers labeled as industrial cleaning agents. On paper, the shipment was routine part of the endless tide of goods flowing from China into the Americas. But buried within those boxes was a secret that, if unleashed, could have poisoned thousands. At 04:15 a.m., as dock workers prepared for offload analysts inside an operations room at U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP received an encrypted alert from the ICE Homeland Security Investigations Command Center. A pattern of documents had triggered a red flag: unusual routing, irregular weight distribution, and cargo descriptions that didn't match any legitimate chemical registry. The system labeled it Priority 1, Potential Hazardous Precursor. Half a world away, an officer whispered 2 words into a secure radio line. "It's the one." Within minutes, the CBP Hazardous Interdiction Team, joined by ICE HSI agents, mobilized under Operation Iron Harbor, a joint mission to stop a shipment that could have fueled one of the deadliest drug manufacturing campaigns in modern history. Inside those containers lay over 50,000 kilograms of high-purity precursor chemicals, the key ingredients for mass-producing fentanyl and methamphetamine. Their destination, cartel-controlled facilities run by the Sinaloa organization. Had the shipment reached its buyers, experts estimate it could have produced hundreds of millions of lethal doses, a chemical arsenal disguised as commerce. That night, America's frontline defenders, ICE CBP, and their international partners did something almost impossible. They intercepted a deadly supply chain mid-ocean, neutralized it before it touched Mexican soil, and stopped an invisible bomb from detonating across communities that would never know how close they came to catastrophe. This is the story of how 50,000 kilograms of death were stopped at sea, and how America's silent guardians protected a nation without firing a single shot. Long before the containers reached the Pacific, their story began in the industrial heartlands of southern China, where chemistry and commerce blur into one. Within sprawling complexes of Guangdong province, factories produce thousands of tons of reagents, every month solvents, precursors, and compounds used in everything from pharmaceuticals to cleaning supplies. Most are legitimate. But some shipments hidden behind layers of paperwork and renamed invoices take a darker path. For years, global intelligence reports warned of dual-use chemicals, substances perfectly legal in one setting, but catastrophic in another. Among them, NPP-4-ANPP ephedrine and other reagents essential to the synthesis of fentanyl and methamphetamine. The problem wasn't just production, it was disguise. Once loaded into containers, these chemicals could masquerade as industrial detergents, plasticizers, or laboratory solvents, their deadly potential hidden in plain sight. By late 2024, analysts at ICE Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, and CBP cargo targeting units noticed a worrying trend: a spike in high-volume shipments of certain reagents originating from Chinese exporters that had no clear end-user licenses. The cargo was declared as non-hazardous, but its packaging matched that of compounds previously seized in cartel-linked warehouses in Culiacan and Tijuana. The cartel ecosystem led by the Sinaloa organization had evolved far beyond smuggling narcotics. It had become a logistics empire. Its business model no longer relied solely on crops or border tunnels, but on chemical supply chains, hidden among millions of legitimate shipments flowing through ports every day. By tapping into the same global routes used by multinational corporations, the cartel gained something more valuable than cash flow plausible deniability. The sheer scale was staggering. A single 20-foot container can hold more than 20 metric tons of precursor chemicals. The intercepted cargo, 50,000 kilograms, represented the equivalent of 2 full shipping containers packed with industrial-grade purity. converted in cartel laboratories that amount could generate over 250 million doses of synthetic drugs. To put it bluntly, it was enough to poison entire cities. But how do such shipments move undetected? The answer lies in paperwork and pixels bills of lading HS codes and shipping manifests that blend truth and fiction. A few keystrokes can rename NPP to sodium acetate change ephedrine to industrial cleaner, and the shipment becomes invisible to automated filters. Add offshore intermediaries, transshipment through Singapore or Hong Kong, and a destination listed as a generic warehouse in Mazatlan, and the trail all but disappears. Still, America's digital eyes were open. Every day, ICE analysts feed terabytes of data into AI-driven watch lists, scanning for anomalies, comparing trade routes, flagging inconsistencies in declared weight, container origin, and chemical class. It was one of these systems, a machine learning model trained on past seizures, that first noticed a pattern connecting multiple shipments to one exporter, whose address led to a vacant office in Shenzhen. When investigators cross-referenced financial data, they found payments routed through 3 shell companies registered in the British Virgin Islands, their invoices signed by a logistics broker later identified as a known facilitator for the Sinaloa Cartel's chemical procurement network. The connections were too precise to ignore. By January 2025, an alert was issued to all partner agencies a high-risk shipment had departed Guangzhou port, destined for Lázaro Cárdenas, Mexico. The internal memo read, "Cargo suspected to contain controlled precursors." Volume 50, Zo Zwur kg. Risk level maximum. Tracking priority 1. Behind the dry language of that report was the reality that made every analyst pause. If this shipment reached its destination, cartel chemists could create enough synthetic drugs to flood both sides of the border for months. The numbers weren't abstract, they represented lives, overdoses, and families shattered. The mission was clear. ICE and CBP would have to intercept the shipment in transit before it disappeared into cartel territory. There would be no second chance. In the early hours of February 10, 2025, a small team inside the ICE Homeland Security Investigations Command Center in Washington, D.C., noticed something odd in the daily cargo risk feed. Among the thousands of shipments logged by CBP cargo targeting units, one stood out: a container labeled cleaning solvents shipped from Guangzhou port and bound for Port Lázaro Cárdenas, Mexico. Its declared weight, 24,876 kilograms. Its shipping route, Shenzhen, Singapore, Long Beach, Lázaro Cárdenas. It didn't sound unusual until an analyst compared it to 4 earlier shipments linked to the same exporter. Each one had identical weights, near identical container numbers, and identical descriptions, but none had verifiable delivery records. Somewhere in the data, something was missing. The team's algorithmic flag system, Argo-X, triggered an alert code pattern repetition. Synthetic signature match. It meant the container's metadata shared characteristics with prior precursor seizures connected to Sinaloa-linked brokers. Within minutes, a second alert followed payment routed through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, tied to a dormant import company in Sonora. Inside a secure conference room at CBP headquarters, a meeting was called between ICE CBP and representatives from the Drug Enforcement Administration DEA. On the central screen, a map glowed red, the projected route of a vessel named MV Silver Halo, currently approaching Singapore. Each dot represented a potential handoff, each port a point of risk. This, as it said, Supervisory Agent David Keene, head of the ICE HSI Global Trade Division. This shipment fits every indicator we've seen before: forged manifests, false HS codes, and shell forwarding. If it hits Mexican soil, we lose it forever. The directive was immediate initiate monitoring under Operation Iron Harbor. Within hours, ICE analysts began reconstructing the container's paper trail from digital fragments, bills of lading packing lists and shipper declarations. One line item caught their eye: the declared commodity listed as alkaline surfactant blend, a generic description often used to disguise chemical shipments. But the red flag wasn't the name. It was the harmonized system code attached to it, a code assigned to non-corrosive cleaning agents, not industrial reagents. To verify the anomaly, CBP cargo intelligence officers cross-checked the chemical composition against the global trade database. There was no legitimate exporter registered under that formula. The manufacturer existed only as a one-page website created just weeks before shipment, hosted on a Chinese domain server now offline. Further digging exposed a network of 3 interconnected brokers, one in Hong Kong, one in Panama, and one in Guadalajara. Each company shared the same business address pattern: Suite 201, Shared Mail Center, Virtual Business Park. No phone numbers, no physical warehouses, just shell signatures. Through diplomatic channels, ICE's attaché office in Beijing quietly reached out to China's Anti-Smuggling Bureau, requesting assistance under the Customs Mutual Assistance Agreement. The Chinese officers confirmed the exporter's business license had expired 2 years earlier. Someone had reactivated it using forged documents. By February 15th, the intelligence mosaic was complete. HSI analysts identified matching shipment references in Singapore's port database where the container was awaiting transfer to the MV Silver Halo. Using a combination of AI anomaly detection and human verification, the analysts confirmed the shipping line had reused container seals, a clear violation of maritime security protocols. The next step was delicate. Under maritime law, the United States could not directly seize a foreign-flagged vessel in international waters without consent. The only viable strategy: secure cooperation through allied customs and port authorities. That meant diplomacy, precision, and timing. On February 17th, a high-level coordination call took place between ICE, CBP, and liaison officers from Singapore Customs and Mexican Navy Intelligence, CMAR. The message was clear. We believe the container labeled SLSU 7482 holds precursor materials destined for cartel manufacturing. The risk is classified as critical Tier 1. At the same time, CBP's National Targeting Center, NTC, in Sterling, Virginia, pushed a do-not-release flag into the global cargo tracking network, ensuring that any attempt to move, unload, or reroute the container would trigger an instant alert. Every movement of the MV Silver Halo was now visible in real time via satellite. Then came the breakthrough. A forensic accountant embedded within HSI's Financial Crimes Unit discovered that the same export broker had received a 1.8 million wire transfer from a shell corporation in Culiacan, disguised as payment for pharmaceutical equipment. The link to the Sinaloa Cartel was now indisputable. They're using global trade as camouflage, Agent Keene said in a closed briefing. They've industrialized trafficking. If we don't hit them mid-route, we'll be chasing their products in overdose reports. The decision was unanimous: the interception would take place before the vessel reached Mexican waters. A multinational task force, ICE, CBP, CMAR, and Singapore's port enforcement would act in coordination under the umbrella of Operation Iron Harbor. By February 19th, everything was in motion. Surveillance satellites locked on the MV Silver Halo as it cleared the South China Sea. 2 encrypted communication lines were opened between Langley, Washington, and Naval Intelligence Command, Pacific. Every screen glowed with data container IDs, cargo weights, vessel drafts, and atmospheric readings. And as the ship sailed silently through the dark expanse of the Pacific, a message came from Washington's National Security Council stamped, classified, Priority 1. Proceed with interdiction. All agencies authorized. Do not allow transfer to cartel possession. The hunt was now official. The vessel was moving, and so was America. At 03:40 a.m., the cargo vessel MV Silver Halo entered the Malacca Strait, moving west under low cloud cover. Its destination was still listed as Port Lázaro Cárdenas, Mexico, but no one on deck knew that the ship had already become a moving target on 3 different intelligence networks. To the crew, it was just another transit. To the agencies watching from thousands of miles away, it was a potential disaster in motion. From a command post inside Singapore's Maritime Coordination Center, ICE, CBP, and Singapore Customs monitored the vessel in real time. Drones hovered miles above, invisible to radar. On satellite feeds, container SLSU 77482 glowed in red, a digital marker for something too dangerous to let pass. Every minute brought it closer to the next waypoint. At 04:07 a.m., authorization came through a secure channel from Operation Iron Harbor Command in Washington Interception, cleared. Execute Phase 2. A Singapore Police Coast Guard patrol boat, supported by CBP liaison officers and HSI hazardous enforcement specialists, accelerated toward the freighter's flank. Floodlights pierced the mist, reflecting off the black water. Through the radio crackle, a single voice came from the bridge of the lead patrol boat. "This is Enforcement Team Bravo. Permission to board confirmed." Within seconds, grappling ladders hooked the hull and officers began the climb. The operation was silent. No sirens, no gunfire, just the dull clang of boots against metal and the hiss of sea spray. By 04:22 a.m., the boarding party had reached the deck. The crew, startled but compliant, was ordered to halt operations. In the control room at ICE headquarters, Supervisory Agent David Keene watched the live body cam feed flicker across multiple screens. "Stay steady. Confirm the target container," he said. The feed cut to a narrow steel corridor lined with stacked boxes, the camera bouncing with every step. "Visual on container. SLSU 77482, an officer whispered through the comms. "Seal intact. Manifest matches, forged paperwork. Requesting hazmat clearance." 2 agents wearing full-level B hazmat suits approached the container door. One of them, a CBP explosives specialist, deployed a portable chemical sensor that hissed as it analyzed vapor samples near the latch. Within seconds, the display turned amber, then red. Positive detection for restricted precursor compounds. Confirmed trace of NPP derivatives. Inside the command center, Agent Keene clenched his jaw. "That's it. That's our payload. Proceed." The agents sliced through the metal seal, swung open the doors, and the smell hit instantly. It was harsh, acidic, and unmistakable. Inside were rows of blue drums marked with false labeling industrial cleaning compound, non-corrosive. But the internal hazard placards had been crudely painted over. Beneath the layer of paint under ultraviolet light, the truth glowed faintly. UN 2869, flammable, liquid, toxic. Technicians moved in, scanning each drum with handheld Raman spectrometers. The readouts confirmed it. High-purity precursor chemicals concentrated enough to serve as the backbone for a major fentanyl synthesis network. The total mass, once cross-checked with container records, came to 50,000 kilograms, the exact figure predicted by the analysts. With confirmation established, the vessel was officially declared a hazardous scene. All non-essential personnel were evacuated to the deck while hazmat units began containment protocols. Each drum was resealed, tagged, and logged under a HSI evidence chain, a -45874590, ensuring that every gram could be traced back through court proceedings. Meanwhile, maritime tactical teams swept the ship for other suspicious containers. 2 more units, labeled as plastic coatings, contained secondary chemicals used to stabilize synthetic compounds, proof that this was not a single mistake, but a deliberate, coordinated operation. By 05:10 a.m., the MV Silver Halo was fully secured and under escort toward Singapore's restricted berth area, where ICE and CBP forensic teams would conduct full offload inspections. onshore customs agents and chemical specialists from Singapore's National Environment Agency prepared a secure containment zone guarded by both local police and U.S. federal officers. As dawn broke over the harbor, the magnitude of the seizure came into view. Rows of steel drums, still glistening with condensation, stood under the floodlights, each one a small piece of what could have been a continent-wide tragedy. In the debriefing room back in Washington, Agent Keene's voice carried through the speakers. No casualties, no leaks. Cargo secured. This is a clean intercept. Applause was forbidden. Classified operations never got celebration, but the silence that followed spoke louder than any headline. 50,000 kilograms of death had just been stopped before it crossed an invisible border. That night, a report was filed under Directive HS-12B, marked sensitive but unclassified. Its summary was simple. Operation Iron Harbor successfully interdicted hazardous precursor shipment. Estimated prevention, 250 million potential lethal doses. No contamination, no injuries, full recovery. The MV Silver Halo was later released to port custody, its crew interrogated, and its cargo transferred under armed guard to a DEA-certified hazardous facility. There, each drum would be analyzed, cataloged, and destroyed under supervision. But inside every agency involved, the sentiment was the same. This was not just a seizure, it was a message. America had proven once again that its reach extended far beyond its borders, and somewhere in Sinaloa, a network expecting its next supply of chemical lifeblood was about to discover that the ocean had betrayed them. When the MV Silver Halo finally docked at Singapore's restricted berth, the ship no longer carried ordinary cargo. It carried evidence of an industrial-scale conspiracy. The operation was over, but the investigation had just begun. Inside a quarantined warehouse, ICE and CBP forensic chemists, working alongside Singapore's Hazardous Substances Control Division, began cataloging the seized materials. Every drum, every container, and every residue sample was photographed, weighed, sealed, and logged into the U.S. Federal Evidence Registry. The label Industrial Cleaning Compound had been peeled back to reveal internal markings of Chinese origin, specifically batch codes linking the contents to a chemical plant in Guangdong Province. The readings stunned the analysts. The compounds were 99.4% pure NPP and 4 ANPP derivatives, both essential precursors used to synthesize fentanyl analogs. At that purity, 1 kilogram could yield over 50,000 doses of finished narcotic product. The 50,000 kilograms seized represented more than 2.5 billion lethal doses, a staggering amount that could have flooded global black markets for months. Inside a secured meeting room at ICE headquarters in Washington, forensic analysts presented their findings. The numbers spoke for themselves. This was industrial-scale warfare disguised as trade, one chemist said. They weren't shipping chemicals, they were shipping death in bulk. The report, classified under DEA Forensic File F2113, confirmed the direct link between the seized reagents and laboratory residues previously found in Sinaloa-affiliated labs in Sonora and Durango. Microscopic trace analysis revealed identical impurities, chemical fingerprints that proved the materials originated from the same manufacturing process. The evidence was bulletproof. From there, the case shifted to prosecution and diplomacy. The United States formally invoked the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty MLAT with both China and Mexico, requesting full cooperation in tracing the chemical suppliers, financial intermediaries, and logistics networks tied to the shipment. Within days, U.S. Customs and Border Protection shared their data package with the Ministry of Public Security of China, accompanied by a diplomatic note from the U.S. Department of State labeled Subject International Trafficking of Controlled Precursors. Urgent joint inquiry requested. Beijing's response came cautiously. A spokesperson for the Chinese Ministry of Commerce issued a public statement acknowledging the seriousness of the matter and promising to investigate whether rogue exporters had falsified licenses or violated customs protocols. Meanwhile, Chinese cybercrime investigators traced the exporter's registration to a dissolved entity whose digital infrastructure had been reactivated using stolen credentials. In Mexico City, the reaction was swift and political. The Attorney General's office, FGR, held an emergency press conference confirming cooperation with the U.S., but emphasizing sovereign oversight. Behind closed doors, however, Mexican Navy intelligence CMAR began mapping cartel logistics nodes believed to have been awaiting the shipment. Several warehouses in Mazatlan and Culiacan were quietly raided within 72 hours, uncovering empty drums and chemical residue consistent with prior Sinaloa operations. The diplomatic cables between Washington, Beijing, and Mexico City multiplied. Each country faced a different dilemma. The U.S. wanted accountability, China wanted deniability, and Mexico wanted stability. The seizure had disrupted a multi-million-dollar supply chain, and the aftershocks rippled through both criminal and political ecosystems. By March 2025, HSI financial investigators uncovered a complex laundering network tied to the transaction over $7. $3 million routed through offshore accounts in Hong Kong, Panama, and the British Virgin Islands, all connected to the same intermediary, an import broker in Culiacan, with links to the Sinaloa Cartel's logistics chief, known by the alias El Ingeniero. Arrest warrants were issued through Interpol Red Notices, while U.S. prosecutors began drafting indictments under Title 21 U.S. Code Parv 960A, narcoterrorism and precursor trafficking. The first courtroom phase began quietly in Washington, D.C. federal court behind sealed doors. The defendants, represented by offshore legal proxies, were accused of conspiring to facilitate the export of controlled substances without authorization. The evidence, digital trails, chemical signatures, and maritime logs was overwhelming. As the legal wheels turned, public awareness began to grow. Major networks like ABC, NBC, and Reuters released reports citing anonymous officials U.S. intercepts 50,000 kg of precursor chemicals destined for Mexican cartel labs. But the full scale of the operation remained classified. Behind the scenes, U.S. diplomats walked a careful line. Washington could not publicly accuse China of complicity without destabilizing trade relations, but neither could it ignore the evidence. Negotiations between the U.S. Department of State and the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs resulted in a confidential agreement. Tighter export vetting for high-risk chemical shipments, increased data sharing between customs agencies, and the creation of a joint task force on precursor tracking. For Mexico, the political cost was internal. Members of Congress demanded to know how cartels had managed to maintain such vast logistical freedom. The President's office responded by pledging to expand cooperation with U.S. Homeland Security. At the same time, CMAR deployed additional maritime patrols and announced new cargo screening measures, but the most profound impact was felt on the criminal side. Intelligence intercepts revealed panic among Sinaloa's Chemical Procurement Division. Encrypted messages intercepted by DEA SIGINT units captured frantic exchanges. Shipment lost, confirm status, delay manufacturing, find alternative source. For the first time in years, cartel labs in Sinaloa and Sonora went dark, production halted, and prices on the black market surged by 240%. The ripple effects were immediate: fewer overdoses reported in border states, and a measurable dip in synthetic narcotic purity levels detected by DEA field labs. Still, the officials knew it was temporary. Cartels adapt. The win was strategic, not absolute. But in that brief window, the system had worked exactly as intended. When the ICE deputy director briefed Congress weeks later, he ended his testimony with a line that summed up the magnitude of the event. What we stopped wasn't just a shipment. It was a storm, And if we hadn't, we wouldn't be counting kilograms. We'd be counting bodies. The aftermath of the Operation Iron Harbor seizure rippled far beyond the Pacific. What began as a single intercepted shipment became a case study in how global trade, criminal innovation, and national security collide in the 21st century. At first, the operation was viewed as a tactical success. 50,000 kilograms of precursors confiscated, one of the largest seizures in history. But in the weeks that followed, analysts realized its implications reached far deeper. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, described it not as a bust, but as a proof of concept for how modern law enforcement could track and dismantle cartel supply networks through data, not just raids. Behind the walls of the CBP National Targeting Center in Sterling, Virginia, engineers and analysts reviewed every piece of digital evidence from the case. They built a new AI model capable of tracing chemical flow signatures, subtle patterns in export data trade invoices, and shipment timing that reveal the fingerprints of illicit logistics. It was part of a larger initiative quietly named Project Sentinel, designed to detect and interdict global precursor shipments before they ever reach cartel hands. CBP Commissioner Michael Reyna summarized the lesson bluntly during a classified debrief. Cartels don't need planes or tunnels anymore. They have cargo ships and spreadsheets. The future of enforcement is information. The Department of Justice, DOJ, took a similar view, urging Congress to strengthen Title 21 statutes to include stricter penalties for falsifying chemical exports and to grant prosecutors more latitude to charge brokers as narco-terror facilitators. In parallel, the DEA's Office of Diversion Control began drafting new regulatory frameworks to expand the Controlled Substances Act, adding previously unlisted precursor analogs to the restricted registry. But perhaps the most transformative impact came through policy. The White House National Security Council, NSC, established an interagency working group called the Chemical Interdiction Response Force, CIRF, a permanent data-driven coalition combining ICE, CBP, DEA, and U.S. Coast Guard intelligence. Its mission identified, track, and seize chemical shipments that pose potential narcotics or biohazard threats. At ports across the United States, Los Angeles, Houston, Savannah, and Newark, new high-resolution X-ray scanners, portable spectrometers, and AI manifest analyzers were deployed. Within months, seizures of illegal chemical precursors increased by 38%, and targeting accuracy improved by nearly 70%. Beyond U.S., Borders Operation Iron Harbor reshaped international cooperation. Singapore agreed to share its maritime customs database with U.S. authorities under a new intelligence-sharing framework. Mexico, in response to the fallout, signed a bilateral agreement expanding joint port inspections and giving U.S. advisors limited oversight at Lázaro Cárdenas and Manzanillo. Even China, after initial hesitation, quietly strengthened export controls requiring end-user verification for more than 120 precursor compounds. For law enforcement, the battlefront had changed. Trafficking no longer looked like convoys or back-alley deals. It looked like logistics spreadsheets, invoice forgeries, and AI-defying paperwork. To counter it, America's defenders had to think like economists and coders as much as agents and officers. Still, experts warned of what comes next. Cartels, especially the Sinaloa organization and its rival, the CJNG Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, were already adapting. Intelligence intercepts suggested they were investing in synthetic chemistry labs capable of producing precursors from legal compounds, bypassing international shipping entirely. The new arms race would not be on the ocean, but in the laboratory. In Langley, an intelligence report summarized the evolving threat. When enforcement closes the ports, the chemists open the doors. Control the science or lose the war. To meet that challenge, DARPA, in collaboration with Homeland Security, began funding research into molecular tagging, embedding invisible isotopic tracers into legitimate industrial chemicals, allowing them to be tracked if diverted into black markets. Simultaneously, ICE HSI launched new training programs teaching agents to recognize fraudulent trade documentation and to operate advanced chemical detection technologies in the field. In Congress, lawmakers from both parties, traditionally divided on enforcement budgets, found rare unity. The 2025 Anti-Precursor Security Act passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. It allocated $600 million for AI-driven cargo monitoring, $80 million for maritime collaboration with allied nations, and $50 million for chemical fingerprint databases accessible to international partners. By summer 2025, the ripple effect of Operation Iron Harbor reached global institutions. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, cited it as a model for multinational chemical control. European ports, including Rotterdam and Antwerp, began testing American-style smart manifest algorithms developed by CBP's tech division. The World Customs Organization, WCO, formally adopted a new alert code, Cargo Red 12, reserved for suspected dual-use chemical shipments. The result wasn't just policy, it was precedent. For the first time, an international framework treated chemical precursors as strategic threats, not just commercial goods. America had forced the world to acknowledge what it had long understood, that addiction begins in a spreadsheet, not a syringe. Even the private sector felt the impact. Major shipping lines like Maersk Evergreen and Costco introduced internal compliance divisions focused on cargo integrity. Tech companies partnered with ICE to build automated fraud detection systems for digital invoices. In universities, chemistry departments introduced new ethics modules, an acknowledgement that science, too, had moral front lines. But amid the progress, one constant remained: the fight was far from over. In the words of HSI Deputy Director Keene, whose team had tracked the MV Silver Halo from the first digital anomaly to the final seizure, "We stopped one storm, but the ocean is full of clouds. The moment we close one route, they'll draw another. That's why we can't rest. We don't patrol borders anymore. We patrol the flow of the world." The interception of 50,000 kilograms had proven one truth: that power in the modern era isn't just military or political. It's informational. And in that domain, America still leads. As the final report of Operation Iron Harbor crossed the desks in Washington, it carried only a few lines, no ceremony, no headlines, just data and silence. Yet behind that silence was one of the most consequential interdictions in modern history. 50,000 kilograms of precursor chemicals seized without a single shot fired had prevented what experts called a rolling catastrophe waiting to happen. In Singapore, under the early morning sun, the sealed containers sat behind barbed wire marked with both the U.S. Customs and Border Protection insignia, and the ICE Homeland Security investigations seal symbols of cooperation, forged not by politics, but by purpose. For the men and women who traced those chemicals from Guangzhou to the Malacca Strait, this was more than enforcement. It was a quiet assertion of control in a world that often feels uncontrollable. In Langley, a memo circulated among intelligence analysts summarizing the outcome in one line, one vessel: 50,000 kilograms. 2.5 billion doses erased. No one would ever see the faces of the analysts who found the anomaly or the hazmat officers who opened the container in the dark. Their work would remain classified, their names redacted, their success measured not in medals but in lives unlost. Far from the cameras, the Pacific remained still a vast corridor of trade risk and vigilance. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another shipment was already being packed, another network already planning. But this time, they would move with the knowledge that America was watching not with armies, but with intelligence, precision, and unrelenting resolve. Because the world may sleep, but America never does.